In 1901, a drill near Beaumont, Texas, hit something nobody was looking for. Oil shot 100 feet into the air. Within a decade, the countries that controlled oil, not the ones with the most land or the largest armies, started writing the rules for everyone else. We are watching that exact moment happen again. Except this time, nobody's drilling. They're building chips. By the end of this video, I want you to look at the world differently. Not as countries on a map, but as a stack of resources that decide who gets to lead the next 50 years. And I think you'll start noticing this stack everywhere, once you know what to look for. For most of the 20th century, power followed a simple formula. Whoever controlled oil controlled movement, controlled militaries, controlled manufacturing. The Gulf states became wealthy, not because they were industrious in the way people usually mean it. They were sitting on the one resource the entire global economy ran on. Wars were fought over it, currencies were pegged to it. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency partly because oil was priced in dollars. A system put in place in the 1970s that's still shaping markets today. Here's the part most people miss. Oil wasn't powerful because you could burn it. It was powerful because everything else, transportation, food production, war machines, depended on it being available, and a small number of actors controlled the supply. That's the pattern to hold on to. Not what's valuable, but what does everything else depend on, and who controls the tap. Today, that tap isn't a pipeline. It's a chip fabrication plant in Taiwan. Almost every advanced AI model in the world, the ones running your search engine, your customer service bot, your investment research, depends on a small number of chips designed by one company, NVIDIA, and manufactured by an even smaller number of facilities, mostly run by TSMC in Taiwan. Think about that concentration for a second. The single most important input for the most important technology of this decade is bottlenecked through one company, on one island, 90 miles off the coast of a much larger and increasingly assertive neighbor. That's not a coincidence anyone's comfortable with. It's the reason the US has spent the last few years restricting which AI chips can be sold to which countries. It's the reason chip independence has become a national security conversation in Washington, in Beijing, and in Brussels, not just a business one. When a government restricts chip exports, it isn't really about trade. It's about deciding who's allowed to build the next era of intelligence and who has to wait. That's a new kind of power. Oil-producing nations decided who could move. Chip-producing nations are starting to decide who gets to think, at scale, with machines, faster than any human team could. Here's where it gets less obvious and more interesting. You can have all the chips in the world and still lose the race, because training and running advanced AI models takes an enormous, almost absurd amount of electricity. A single large data center cluster can need as much power as a mid-sized city. This is why you're starting to see tech companies sign deals to restart old nuclear plants. Why some are quietly investing in small modular reactors. Why data center and energy grid are now showing up in the same sentence in ways they never did a decade ago. The countries that can generate cheap, abundant, reliable electricity and get it to a data center fast have a structural advantage that no amount of clever software can replace. This is the same logic as oil refineries needing to be near ports. Except now, the new ports are power grids, and not every country has the grid capacity to host what AI companies want to build. So a second axis of power emerges quietly behind the chip story. Not just who can build the brain, but who can afford to feed it electricity day and night, without the lights flickering somewhere else. This next part sounds like science fiction, and a year ago it mostly was. Some companies are now seriously exploring putting data centers in orbit. The logic isn't crazy once you hear it. In space, solar power is available almost constantly. There's no land use fight, no local water demand for cooling, and no neighborhood pushing back on a new facility. Early experiments are already launching small AI compute payloads into orbit to test exactly this. It's still early. Nobody is running a major AI model from a satellite cluster today. But the fact that serious engineers and serious money are testing it tells you something about how scarce land, water, and power have become on Earth for this industry. When the cheapest unclaimed real estate for your infrastructure is literally outside the atmosphere, you know the resource competition down here has gotten intense. If this works at scale, it adds a fourth dimension to the New World Order. Not just who controls chips and electricity, but who controls orbit. Now, the resource that's the hardest to put a number on, but maybe the most fought over: people. A relatively small number of researchers worldwide genuinely understand how to push these AI systems forward. Companies have offered eye-watering compensation packages, not for executives, for individual researchers, because losing the right 10 people can set a lab back years. Countries know this too. Immigration policy has quietly become an AI strategy. The nations that make it easy for top AI talent to live, work, and stay are accumulating an advantage that's much harder to copy than a chip order. You can buy more chips next quarter. You can't buy a decade of someone's research experience. This is also where it gets personal. If you're watching this and you work in tech, research, or even adjacent fields, the war for talent isn't abstract. It's reshaping which countries and companies you'd actually want to build your career inside, because that's where the resources and the leverage are concentrating. And finally, the resource that doesn't look like a resource at all: regulation. The European Union built one of the first comprehensive AI rulebooks. The United States has taken a different, more fragmented approach. China is regulating AI development with an entirely different set of priorities: control and alignment with state goals first, commercial speed second. Here's the part worth sitting with. Whoever writes the rules first often ends up exporting them. Companies that want to operate globally often end up designing their products to satisfy the strictest regulator because it's cheaper than building different versions for different markets. That gives the rule writer outsized influence, not through force, but through paperwork. Regulation used to be downstream of power. Increasingly, it's becoming a tool of power, a way for a government with fewer chips and less electricity to still shape how the technology behaves everywhere it's sold. So here's the full picture. Chips decide who can build it. Electricity decides who can run it at scale. Orbit may decide who can run it without limits. Talent decides who can keep improving it. And regulation decides who gets to set the terms everyone else has to follow. 5 layers. Stack them up, and you get a rough map of the next world order. Not drawn along old borders, but along who controls each layer and how many layers any single country or company controls at once. Right now, that map is genuinely contested. No single nation has all 5. The US leads in chips and talent, but is racing to catch up on electricity capacity. China is investing enormously in electricity and manufacturing scale, but is restricted on the most advanced chips. The EU has almost no chip or compute advantage, but it's trying to win on regulation alone. That's actually the most useful thing to take from all this. The order isn't settled. It's being negotiated in real time, the way oil power was negotiated through the 1960s and 70s, before anyone fully understood how permanent the shift would be. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. When oil became the world's defining resource, the people who understood the shift early, investors, engineers, even entire countries, repositioned years ahead of everyone else. The people who didn't spent decades catching up. You don't need to predict exactly who wins this race, but it's worth asking, in your own work, your own investments, your own career, which side of this stack am I closest to? Chips, power, orbit, talent, or rules? Because in 10 years, that question might matter more than almost anything else happening in the news cycle today. I'll keep tracking this as it develops. The chip restrictions, the energy deals, the talent moves, the regulations being written this year that we'll all be living under for the next decade. If that's useful to you, this is the channel for it.